Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We're about to begin our first session for today, titled Politics and Personalities of Pakistan in Conversation with Najam Sethi. And the moderator for today is Agha Ghazanfar Saab. Agha Ghazanfar Saab is the principal of the prestigious HSN College, Lahore, and has also been a member of the elite civil services of Pakistan. And throughout his career, he's been running dual roles, both on the academic side and the administrative side. And we thought that it is best that a person of his prestige should be here to moderate this session. And so let's start this off without further ado. I would request everybody to please either turn off your cell phones or please put them on silent so that they do not ring in the middle of the session. Secondly, we will be having a question answer at the end, 10 to 15 minutes, and we will stop the conversation in the middle, and then you can take your questions and we can ask them over there. You can just raise your hand and then somebody will come over and give you a mic for the questions. So let's begin.
Thank you very much. I'm here actually in neither capacity, neither as a civil servant nor as a university professor, but as an old, very old in fact, friend of Najam's. We go back many, many years. I wouldn't like to divulge how many years because that will be telling. I met Najam first when we were students in government college, and we were both vying for a particular role in a stage production. Having acted in two previous plays in government college, I thought I had a splendid claim to the central role in what became one of the most well-known plays. But I was sadly disappointed because Najam beat me to it. He occupied center stage and relegated to me the role of a lackey, in fact a butler's role. And I'm telling you this because ever since that time, Najam has occupied center stage. And I have always found myself in the woodwork of bureaucracy, or often when I have peeped out of that woodwork, I found myself in the alleys and the byways of academe. But from these alleys, I have over the last, and I won't tell you how many, years, observed Najam grow from strength to strength, from playing one protagonist and then another, but always center stage, and been really an inspiration for many of us, including myself. The topic for today's discussion, for which he is obviously, I think, the most eminently qualified person in Pakistan, is to talk about personalities and politics. There is no better witness, as I said, to the unfolding of history in Pakistan than Najam, and you will pretty soon know why. But before I ask him questions, I just wanted to share with you, Najam. Sitting in Oxford, from where I'm coming, I came last month, I happened to get hold of a manuscript. It was actually a PhD dissertation written by Imdad Hussain, not Dr. Imdad Hussain, the professor, but Professor Siraj's son, Imdad Hussain Imi. And his dissertation is on the failure of parliamentary politics in Pakistan. It's not available outside that library because he prohibited anyone from making a photocopy of it or prohibited reproduction. So I had to sit in the library and read all 450 pages. He interviewed almost everyone who mattered between 1945 and 1966. That is when the thesis was published. And on that basis, he came to the conclusion that the failure of parliamentary democracy really was owing to an instinct, an urge upon our part to be authoritarian, and that the authoritarian narrative ran through it like an undercurrent. throughout the political development. And there are so many eye-openers in that. I think the narrative that you will take on will be, in fact, a continuation of what happened in the first 20 years of Pakistan. Without, therefore, much ado, I'm going to ask you a few leading questions.
Before you kick off, I'd just like to say thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. I'm always amazed at the literary interest in Karachi. Although we in Lahore have tried to copy you, but really there's no comparison. Karachi is by far culturally and literally now the center of Pakistan. And I'm amazed that at 10 a.m. in the morning there are so many people over here. I said to Amina, you're getting me to start first thing in the morning. I don't think we'll even have 10 people there. Certainly if this was Lahore, it would be very difficult to fill a room at 10 a.m. in the morning. Having said that, just maybe a sentence or two to add to what Agha Ghazanfar, or Higgins as we call him, said about our days in Government College. Yes, we both acted in a play called The Swan. And The Swan was originally an English film in which Louis Jourdain and I think Alec Guinness, and then who was the lady in it? I think Grace Kelly or somebody. Yes, Grace Kelly. So the competition was not for Grace Kelly amongst us, but it was for the lead role. But I'd just like to say that we both had excellent, impeccable taste in beautiful women, because the lady who played the role of the Swan was gorgeous. And we both
beat me to that as well.
And so that's what kept us going, the chase for the Swan, as it were. Those were happy memories. And then much water has flowed since then. I went into academia and then into journalism and dabbled in politics. And Iggy went into the civil service, then into academia, and now he is in Aitchison College, which is his alma mater. So having just said that, shoot.
All politicians, and I suppose leaders of repute, have to spend some time in prison. Jawaharlal Nehru, in fact, said, I didn't go into the civil service. Instead, I chose a different profession called jail-going in India. Tell us about your incarceration.
Oops. That's a opening bouncer, as it were. I think what we're going to do today is do a little bit of history and a little bit of personality politics, because from the era of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto until now, I've been a journalist but intimately involved in politics, and I've had occasion to meet the top political leaders and interact with them, often to my distress. And so we thought we'd talk a little bit about these political leaders that I've met. Some have passed away, some are still around. And my interactions with them at very critical moments in the history of Pakistan.
Sorry to interrupt you here. In fact, I have a list here of all the people that you have met, and I'm going to ask you, but
yes.
Indeed to that question, was that, were you imprisoned, obviously either a political prisoner or a prisoner of conscience, in the Bhutto regime, and was it Mr. Bhutto who did that?
Yes, well, you know, I was in Cambridge when East Pakistan happened. And as students at the university, we were all opposed to the military action. And we would demonstrate outside the Pakistan High Commission with candlelit vigils and so on. And at that time, some of us felt that after Bangladesh, it was likely that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto would become the next prime minister. And that Bhutto was an authoritarian sort of personality, And I also held him partly responsible for the crisis in Bangladesh. And I and some of our friends, we thought that the next target by the juntas or the establishment would be Balochistan. Because the Baloch nationalists were raising their voice for autonomy. Khair Bakhsh Mari, Ataullah Mengal, Ghaus Bakhsh Bizenjo, and so on. And we thought that the Punjabis had been condemned for the military action in Balochistan, in Bangladesh. And we thought that, well, if something else happens in Balochistan, the Punjabis are going to be condemned again. So why don't we go and show solidarity with the Baloch as a preemption to what we thought would be an inevitable conflict between the leaders of Balochistan and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And in 1973, that's exactly what happened. Bhutto dismissed the Baloch and Pashtun governments, the NAP governments, and sent in the army into Balochistan. And as it happened, I was arrested as for trying to help the Baloch in some small way and put into solitary confinement and then into Hyderabad prison, accused of conspiring against the state of Pakistan. And along with me in Hyderabad prison, there were 55 members of parliament, and 2 governors, 2 chief ministers, members of parliament, MPs and MNAs from, at that time, Northwest Frontier Province and then in Balochistan. And I got to know these leaders very well, especially the leaders of the Baloch movement. There are 2 things that stand out in my mind about these leaders. Khair Bakhsh Mari was a very private sort of person. He thought of himself as a socialist or as a Maoist. In prison, he would clean his own room, clean his own toilets. He would not allow anyone to come in. He would not shake hands with anyone because he just felt that it was an unclean thing to do. He had some very interesting idiosyncrasies. But as a political leader, he was quite aloof from people. He didn't like mixing with people. He didn't trust people. But he was an intellectual. He'd been educated at H.S. College. He did not carry good memories of H.S. College. He hated the Punjabis. It was a visceral sort of hatred. But I came to befriend him in prison, and we spent nearly a year and a half together in prison. Spent all our free time talking, studying together, holding study groups. He was avidly into Maoist literature and socialist literature, and since I'd been to university and I was familiar with much of it, he and I would sit and chat for hours about what Mao said and what Ho Chi Minh said and what happened here and what happened there and so on and so forth. And in time to come, he began to trust me, and he became a friend of mine. And subsequently, Khair Bakhsh Mari, we were all released from prison after the coup because all political prisoners were released. Ghaus Bakhsh Bizenjo was an incredible person. He was a diplomat par excellence. And he and I used to play chess together in prison. And he would talk about the history of Pakistan from the Baloch point of view. And he was a gentleman, a diplomat. He was always for a negotiated settlement with Bhutto, whereas Khair Bakhsh Mari wanted to pick up arms and fight. Ataullah Mengal was in the middle. And he had a heart problem. And my first cooking lesson happened in fact, Hyderabad jail, because Sardar Mengal was advised by the doctors that he could not eat certain types of things. And so he had to have grilled food. And so they brought in an electric grill. And I remember Sardar saying to me one day, saying, I don't know how to operate this thing, can you read the instructions? And so I learned how to cook for him. And during that time, again, got an idea of Baloch history in terms of their narrative. And I remember one particularly striking conversation I had with him, in which he said that, we had a government in Balochistan. We didn't even know how to run a government. We were so naive and so innocent. And the best thing that could have happened to us was that we were dismissed by Bhutto. If he hadn't dismissed us, 6 months later, the people of Balochistan would have kicked us out. Because we were running a very bad government. We didn't know how to run government. We were never trained to run governments. and so on. And of course, there was a lot of bitterness about what the Punjabis have done, and so on and so forth. So over a period of time, became close friends with Sardar and with the KB, as we called Khair Bakhsh Mari, and Ghaus Bakhsh Bizenjo, who remained till the end a dear friend. When we were all released and I went back to Lahore, he would often come to Lahore and call on me, and we would sit and chat. And I learned a lot of his strong points of patience and diplomacy and compromise. So these were all learning experiences, but they were also very important as a part of our history in terms of why Bhutto dismissed the Baloch governments, what charges were laid in the Hyderabad conspiracy case.
Why did he do that?
Well, he did not get along with the Baloch leaders. They wanted autonomy. They didn't want federal interference. And Bhutto was somebody who wanted to run all of Pakistan at a microscopic level. And he was not prepared to give autonomy to the Sardars, and he also distrusted them. The intelligence reports had said that the Baloch had something called BUG, Baloch Underground Movement. And the Baloch were conspiring with Iran or with the Afghan government to set up a separate independent state. It was all nonsense. There was no such thing. I'm privy to a lot of things that happened at that time. But that was the narrative. And something interesting happened at that time, that Akbar Bukti, who was a member of the Baloch underground, or a member of these three, there were four of them originally, then Akbar split. I don't know how many of you remember, there was a scandal called the Iraqi arms scandal. Mm-hmm. If you'll recall, what happened was that a consignment of weapons was shipped from Iraq to Islamabad, and it was supposed to have been cleared and taken away to Balochistan. We heard that Bhutto had discovered the conspiracy to smuggle weapons into Balochistan via the diplomatic pouch, as it were, through the Iraqi embassy in Islamabad, and leveled charges of conspiracy. The man who actually apparently told Bhutto about this was Bukti, when he split from them. And later it transpired that Bukti had been possibly somebody who actually connived in this conspiracy. And then using that as a pretext, Bhutto dismissed the governments, put everybody into prison, and charged conspiracy to break up Pakistan against them. There were kids who were 18 years old, 19 years old, and they were members of parliament and chief ministers who were 70 years old. And there were three non-Baloch and non-Pashtun members of this great conspiracy. I was one. You won't believe it, Habib Jalib, the poet, was the second one. Miraj Muhammad Khan from Karachi was the third one. And Ali Bakhsh Talpur from Sindh. The rest were all Pathans and Baloch. And Jalib's fault was that he'd written a poem in which he supported the Baloch struggle and condemned Bhutto's high-handedness. And they picked him up and charged him with conspiracy to dismember Pakistan with the death penalty hanging over our heads. And so, it was a motley sort of crowd in Hyderabad prison. But it was an enormous learning experience in terms of cultures, languages, interests, and so on and so forth.
So in Bhutto's case, it was the same urge to authoritarianism, which I referred to earlier as being the bane of Pakistan since 1947, which Imdad explained as the cause for the failure of politics, of parliamentary democracy in Pakistan. But what else has changed? Seems nothing has changed. As the more things change, the more they remain the same. But do you really think that this sort of paradigm has even moved on, or is it exactly the same 40 years on?
No, the paradigm hasn't changed. Society has changed. There is democracy in the air. The media is freer now, and therefore it's not so easy for rulers to be authoritarian. The judiciary is there, and so on and so forth. But there were times when it was really very, very rough. The times of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto were very rough. The times of Ziaul Haq were very, very, very rough. I remember a particular incident that sheds light on some of these things and on Bhutto himself. When I was in solitary confinement in Balochistan one day, they came and took me, and they said, "We are going to take you to meet somebody very important in Circuit House in Balochistan, in Quetta." So I landed up in Circuit House in chains, and their chains were removed, and I was ushered into a very sumptuous drawing room. And shortly thereafter, 3 or 4 people walked in and introduced themselves. One was the Chief Secretary of the province, one was the IGP of the province, and the third gentleman was then the Interior Secretary, a man called M.A.K. Chaudhary. I don't know how many of you remember him. A very gentle man. And they came in and they sat me down. They looked at me as though I was some sort of strange animal. Who is this guy and what are we doing here? And the one question they asked me was, why are you here? And I said, well, I don't know. You should tell me why I'm here. And they said, well, you're here because, young man, you've been conspiring to break up Pakistan, and we don't take lightly to that. And I said, nothing of the sort. Nobody's trying to break up Pakistan. We're trying to protect Pakistan. And we don't like the sort of policies that the government is following, which is leading to the estrangement of the Baloch and Pashtun. And this is not the sort of thing that should happen. I was all of 21 or 22 and fired with all sorts of ideas and notions. And although solitary confinement had been very tough, and they knew it, they made me an offer. They said, young man, tell us your story. Well, naturally, I had rehearsed the whole thing. I said, there is no story to tell. So he said, no, we think there's a story to tell. And the Prime Minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, would like to meet you. And I've been sent here, and I have a helicopter standing outside. I want you to sit with me in the helicopter and come to Islamabad. We'll go straight to see the Prime Minister and you tell him your story. What is this story of Balochistan? And I was shocked that they actually thought there was a conspiracy or a big some sort of attempt to break up Pakistan, when all that people had been doing was protesting, demanding their rights to run their own province, and so on. Much the same sort of thing that must have happened in Bangladesh. You deny people their rights, they're pushed into a corner, they do things, and then you accuse them of all sorts of things. And I remember saying to him, no, I'm quite happy where I am, and I don't wish to meet the Prime Minister. It's the sort of thing a young man is likely to say. And he said, well, if you don't, you will be in prison for 20 years. To which I remember distinctly, I laughed nervously. And of course, 20 years, the prospect of 20 years in prison for a young man. But I sort of, took a deep breath, and the first thing that came to mind was I said, oh, I don't think Mr. Bhutto will last that long.
Oh. Well done.
And M.A.K. Chaudhary looked at me with a amused smile, and as the sort of patronizing smile that parents have for for their children, as though, what do you know, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, really? And how long do you think he'll last? Again, without any thought or any real analysis, I said, well, a year or 2 at the best. So I'll be out sooner than you think, sir. So he said, and how will he be thrown out? And again, without a serious thought, I said, the military will throw him out. So I had no chidiya at that time, I can tell you that. And a year later, Mr. Bhutto was on his way out. And 2 years later, after we were freed, one day there was a knock on my door in the office, and a man walked in, a frail, decent, gentle-looking man. And I looked at him and I thought I recognized him, but couldn't place him. Because then he was wearing a suit, and this time when he walked in, he was wearing a shalwar kameez. And he said, do you recognize me? I said, no, sir, I don't. He said, well, I am so-and-so. And we met in Circuit House in Quetta 3 years ago. So I looked at him and I said, Well, of course, that story ended. They got up and said, good luck, young man, you'll be here for 20 years, and they went away. And so I sat down, we had a cup of tea, and he said, I came to meet you because I wanted to remind you of what you said at that time. And I have only one question. How did you know Bhutto Sahab was going to be thrown out? I said, sir, I swear to you, I didn't. I was just hoping and praying.
They never learn. But anyway, that was your youth. Russell said that a person, a young man, before the age of 26, if he's not a socialist and an idealist, then he doesn't have a heart. And if after that age he remains an idealist and a socialist, then he has no mind.
So as you can see, one interjection, as you can see, I'm wearing a red tie and red socks.
Ah, very good. So you have remained that at heart.
At heart, yes.
At heart. Yes. I hope we all are. But anyway, so you actually never met the great Zulfikar Ali Bhutto?
I did. I met him in '67 when he was about to launch his movement after he left government. I was in Cambridge. I came back for my holidays, and a friend of mine invited me to her house because her mother was a friend of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's. So I went there and was obviously longing to see Mr. Bhutto. And you know, he walked in, he sat down, he and Satnam Mahmood, the lady, were chatting and having a drink. Mm-hmm. And so I was introduced as this young man from Cambridge who's also a socialist. Mm. And so he looked at me up and down, totally ignored me, and carried on talking, very arrogant. And so I sat there, fumbled, and didn't know what to do until somebody sort of, you know, my friend nudged me and said, say something, do something. So I sort of turned to said, Mr. Bhutto, I have one question. Can you imagine how naive one was? Mm-hmm. And he said, yes. So I said, Bhutto Sahab, you're a socialist, and your suits are all tailored in Savile Row. So he looked at me and said, well, what's wrong with them? I said, and snubbed me completely and carried on as though I didn't exist. So that was my first meeting. The second meeting could have been far more productive if I had chosen to fly in the helicopter.
What about his daughter?
Yes, his daughter. I have very fond memories of Benazir. When she was sworn in as Prime Minister in 1988, we had great hopes. I remember the swearing in. We were with friends and there were tears in the eyes of some of us. You had a young woman standing there with this old guard, the establishment, the ruthless establishment, who had to make way for her. And so she epitomized the hope and aspirations of young people. Within a year, a lot of that had begun to dissipate. And by the time she was thrown out, 2 years later, stories of corruption and mismanagement had begun to do the rounds. I met her shortly before she was overthrown, had went for an interview, got to know her a little bit, carried an interview with her. I think I also went with her on a trip to the Middle East. She was trying to whip up support for the Kashmir cause. But my real interaction with Benazir happened in '94. She was Prime Minister again, and while she had not been Prime Minister for the interim, we occasionally met in London or elsewhere and had chats. And she was very open and accessible, very easy to talk to, but very suspicious. And obviously aloof and arrogant, partly because she was a woman, she had to keep her distance. You couldn't get free beyond a point. And in '94, I was interviewed by BBC about what do you think, will she be, she's become Prime Minister again, will she be a good Prime Minister or a bad Prime Minister, has she learnt any lessons, and so on and so forth. So I sort of, said yes, well, I mean, I expect that she will have learnt her lessons, and she's been given a second chance, and should be wonderful, let's see how she manages. And I did say that, the last time round, she did not keep a tight leash on Asif Zardari. And this time she should, if she wants to run a good ship. I got a phone call from the Prime Minister's house saying, the Prime Minister would like to invite you for lunch. She'd obviously read or heard the interview. So Jugnu and I went off to Islamabad to meet her, and there was just Benazir and Asif Zardari, and the two of us. So we started chatting, and I sort of trying to endear myself to her a little bit. After all, she's the Prime Minister. So I said, Bibi, don't keep Asif here in Lahore, in Islamabad, send him to Lahore so that he can start organizing the party in Punjab. And she turned to me, and then she turned to Jugnu, and then she looked at Asif. And Asif was sitting there grinning away because I think he wanted to get away and come to Lahore. And before we went in there, he quietly said, "Kisko kehna ke mujhe Lahore bhej de." So I sort of dutifully said, Bibi, why don't you send him to Lahore? They'd taken an office there. And she turned around and she said, only on one condition. So I said, Ji, I'll handcuff him to you so that Jugnu can look after both of you. She didn't trust him. He could get up to all sorts of things. And of course, thereby I developed a friendship which became rocky within a year's time. And this is important because Benazir came to Lahore and she was trying to put together a government in Punjab. And Manzoor Bhutto was giving her a lot of trouble. He had 14 MPAs in Punjab, but he was running the show. And he had become chief minister because he was the blackmailer of sorts. And she sat in Circuit House and she called us and said, what shall we do? How shall we do this and how shall we do that? It was generally chit-chat. Of course, some of us knew that she'd already made up her mind and she was just doing this for the sake of form. But she wanted to pretend that she was going to do the right thing by democracy. Take the most popular person in the People's Party, the man who was not corrupt or no great charges against him, Makhdoom Saab from Multan, Altaf Hussein's Makhdoom Altaf. So we were all rooting for him. So Makhdoom Altaf ko bana dein, he'll be very good. Yeah, haan, bilkul theek hai, yes. Hamid Nasir Chattha was there, others were there. And then, as we were leaving, so I was very happy, okay, she's going to do the right thing. As we were leaving, somebody whispered something in my ear. That's when the chidiya came to fly and said, don't believe a word of what she says. So I said, there's something else here. So from the Circuit House, I went straight to the place where the Muslim League, the Chattha group was meeting. And the plan was that Chattha was saying, put in my man, and Zardari was saying, no, let's have a People's Party man. And some of us were saying, take the People's Party man because he was honest, and he was a competent man, and he was not tainted in any way. And she said to me, Najam, we are going to have our own man, and it's going to be Makhdoom Saab. And Makhdoom Saab was sitting there. So we said, fine, okay, BB, see you tomorrow in the assembly when all this is going to happen. So we went away and I went to that place and I started nosing around and found out that things were not right. Then I went to Model Town where Nawaz Sharif's people were putting together something or the other and to find out what was going on, and found out again things were not right. At 8 o'clock I received a phone call from PTV saying the Prime Minister has said that why don't you interview Najam for the 9 o'clock news in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow. Because he knows my mind. I had become suspicious by then. I thought I was going to be used. So I told the Director General who called me, I said, "Aapne agar mujhe line pe liya aur maine kuch aur keh diya, to you lose your job. Because I don't think I'm going to say what the Prime Minister thinks I'm going to say." He said, "Acha ji, he got so scared." So I didn't go on the 9 o'clock news. 9:30 in the morning, I got a call from the Prime Minister's residency saying the Prime Minister expects you to be in the assembly today to see what happens. I didn't go there. I went to my office. I stayed there. At 10:30, I got a call saying that Makhdoom had not been put up by Bibi. At the last minute, she changed her mind and gone with Chattha's candidate, who was a corrupt, atrocious man. At 11:30, I got a call from Bibi saying, "You know, Najam, that how I wanted to do this. I wanted to do the right thing, but there was so much pressure on me, and so on and so forth. And I hope you understand, and I hope you will explain to people I said, Ji, yes, Prime Minister. I didn't say Bibi. I was now very careful and wary. I said, yes, Prime Minister, yes, Prime Minister. Why are you being formal, she said. I said, no, not at all, Ji. It's early in the morning. You didn't come today? I said, yes. You didn't come back last night? I said, Ji, Bibi, I went to Model Town and then I went to the International Hotel to meet her. I see. Well, all right then. I look forward to reading what you have to say. I wrote a blistering, long article explaining how she was fully part of the conspiracy, how she tried to mislead everyone, and how it was all pre-planned, that the man would be, that she would eventually go with the wrong person. I got a call the day the article was published in the Friday Times from a friend of mine who was a member of her cabinet, who said she was raving and ranting against you in the cabinet. She was abusing you. You better stay away from Islamabad. She is mad. She is angry. For 6 months, she didn't talk to me. One day I got a call saying the Prime Minister is going to New York, this is 95, and would like to invite you to join the entourage. I said, really? That means she's forgiven me. I said, yes, absolutely, I'll come along. So I joined them, and we went to Cartagena. There was a conference there. And from Cartagena, we were flying to New York in the middle of the night. And Zafar Abbas, Sherry Rahman, myself, Zahid Hussain and others, we were sitting at the back. And Faratullah Babar, I think it was, who came and said, the Prime Minister wants you up front. So we looked at each other. We said, right. So we went up to the front of the aircraft. And she was sitting there, and Hamid Nasser Chattha was sitting there, and Asif Zardari was sitting there. And so the four of us trooped in and sat down, and I was a little wary, not knowing how she was going to react to me. She was very formal, polite. And Asif was sitting in front of her, I was sitting on this side, and the others were sitting over here. And the conversation was pretty general. I was silent. And then suddenly Asif leaned across and said something to her. And I got an idea of what he said. Basically, it was to the effect that get on with it and sort him out. So I sort of looked, I was a little alarmed, but before I could do it, she laid into me. She said, you are this, you are this, you are this, you are this, you betrayed me, you knew this, you lied, you this. I said, no, Bibi, I'm sorry, I wrote the truth. And you know it, and we all know it. No. And Asif was urging her to go for me. Yeah, This guy, I've always told you, he's this. She really laid it. She was so angry. At one stage, she said, I feel like throwing you out of this aircraft. So, I was sort of sitting there with my head and reeling. And then she said, you'll burn in hell. Of course, my colleagues were delighted. They were sniggering. They were so happy that I was getting the raw end of the deal. And I just sat there and said, sorry, Bibi, I wrote what I thought was the truth. And later it was confirmed that that was the case. And Hamid Nasser Chattha was sitting there looking down because he was part of the conspiracy. And in all honesty, I can tell you that actually Hamid Nasser Chattha is the bird who actually had whispered to me that don't trust her. And now he was sitting on the other side telling her to go for me with Asif. So that's the way politics is. And later, when we all got up to leave, at some stage, ice cream was offered. I was silent. I didn't take anything. I was sulking. And then we were told, okay, thank you. The Prime Minister would now like to rest. So as we got up to leave, she did this to me. She just got up and she just did this. So I looked at her and she just did this. Me meant just stay back. So as soon as the others trooped out, I was standing there and she turned to me and as a completely different person, she said, I am sorry. I am sorry for what I said. I was so struck by that. And I turned to her and I said, Bibi, I am also very sorry. Please forgive me. She said, we are friends. These things happen. You were being a good journalist. I was trying to be a good Prime Minister. And we became friends and remained friends. even though later there was another misunderstanding, and then that was when again things got rough, and then we made up again. So it was up and down all the way. But I have enormous admiration for her. When she came back this time round, there is a particular story that sheds light on some very important developments. I got a call from her in 2007. She was in New York, and she called me from New York, and she said, Najam, what's your assessment? Does Musharraf, do you trust him? We are trying to do this thing, deal with him. Do you trust him? Will he keep his word? And I said, yes, Bibi, I think there are guarantors for this, as you know, which meant the Americans. Yes, I think you should take part in these elections, and you will be elected. I think you should come back. And she said, well, that's exactly what I want to do. But Asif doesn't agree. And he wants to talk to you. So Asif Zardari came on the line, and he said, Tum isko kya samjha rahe ho? I don't trust Musharraf. Her life will be in danger. She should not go back. Asif Zardari in 2007 was warning her not to go back because he felt he could not trust Musharraf and that she would not be safe. And I said, nahi, Asif, you are just imagining things, it's not so bad. And he said, nahi, I'm telling you, but remember my words, and I have remembered his words. So it was quite prophetic. And the fact is, I do believe that there was a conspiracy, and the full story has never been told. Part of the reason is the People's Party in power is not the same party when it's not in power. And unfortunately, Asif Zardari chose to do a type of politics which is really against the legacy of Benazir Bhutto. She was a very different person this time round. She seemed much more mature, and she had a vision. And I knew, she told me when she came back, she said, the one thing that is not going to happen this time, Najam, is Asif is not coming back. He will remain in New York, he will not come back. And I need your support. And I said, Bibi, you have our support. But this time we don't want to make the same mistakes you made 2 times. Don't you worry. And she was very mature. And the rest, as you know, is history.
We've only covered 3 of the personalities, Najam, that I wanted to talk about. There are still, and I think we are going to, I'm not going to let up on this.
Let's jump to Musharraf.
Okay, all right. I was going to go through Nawaz, Lahari,
yes, Nawaz, of course.
Nawaz, Lahari, but maybe you can do it
let's
through
do
the
Nawaz
perspective
quickly.
of Musharraf.
Let's do Nawaz quickly, because again, Nawaz is in power, Musharraf is hanging around. So let's look at 2 contemporary personalities.
Yeah.
You know, the Friday Times started publishing a column on the back page called Ittefaq-Nama, which Jugnu writes. And she'll be talking about it this shortly after, about an hour's time, half an hour's time. And although Nawaz Sharif, I don't think has ever read the column, people would go to him and say that this column takes you apart, takes the mickey out of you, and
which it does.
Humiliates you, and so on and so forth, and you ought to put a stop to this. And at that time, during Nawaz Sharif's first stint as Prime Minister, there were a lot of scandals in Punjab and in corruption scandals and in Islamabad. And I started writing about it in our paper. I received visits from the top police officials and others to stop writing these stories of corruption. And then the Intelligence Bureau got into the act and started to harass us. It was a very, very difficult moment. And we were threatened with all sorts of things. The DIG turned around one day and said that I can't protect you. If you carry on doing this, the Muslim Students Federation is not in our control. They'll come and bomb your office. And one day, actually, thugs came in armed with guns, and I was in my office, and thank God, before they could get to me, I was informed by the intercom that they are coming upstairs to get you. They were armed with weapons, and so I jumped across the roof. And there are all sorts of stories about that time. We survived. It was a very rough period. We survived. But in '99, But then, when Nawaz Sharif was in opposition one day, he came to my house, driving his own four-wheeler. He landed up in my house and sat in my drawing room. And my servant came to me and said, "Ji, you have a visitor." So I said, "Kaun hai?" So he said, "Ji, Mian Nawaz Sharif." So I said, "Oh, bugger off, Nawaz Sharif. Why would he come to see me?" I mean, I thought this guy is just... So I just walked in and there was Mian Sahib sitting there. So, of course, I was taken aback because his regime had really hounded me. And this is 94. So he came here, he was sitting there, and he said, "I came to apologize. I know we were treated you badly, but I have come to apologize, and I hope you will forgive and forget." It's very rare for a political leader to do that. So I said, "Absolutely, sir. End of matter. All is forgiven and forgotten." And then again, in 99, I ran into trouble with him. When again I started writing stories of corruption. And one day they arrested me, trumped up charges and handed me over to the ISI and beat me up and all the rest of it. And anyway, thanks to the Supreme Court, I was released a month later. And many years later, when Nawaz Sharif was out of office again, the coup had taken place and Musharraf had come in. And Nawaz was in London, this is 2004, I think. And Jugnu and I happened to be in London, and I got a call from a friend of mine saying, "Nawaz Sharif is in London and would like to invite you for lunch or dinner. So, are you ready to forgive and forget?" So my attitude has been that this is part of life. I'm a journalist. I cannot carry grudges. I have to do a job. And so we have to move on. And so I said, "Yes, but he'll have to call me. In no intermediaries. This is my number. He should call me and invite me, and then I'll go." So Mian Sahib called me, and Jugnu and I went over to his flat in London, and he said to me, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." So I said, "Of course you knew." This conversation just started off like that. These are insights into these people which have a bearing on their political behavior. And he said, "It was Saifur Rahman who did it. I was misled." I said, "It's okay, Mian Sahib. But Ziaul Haq put me into prison, and my mother ne badi bad duaएं दी थी उनको. And you know what happened to him?" मैंने ऐसे ही कहा. ऐसे जी, जब आपने मुझे डाला तो मेरी माँ फिर मसीते बह गई थी और उन्होंने आपको भी बड़ी बड़ी बद दुआएं दी. So he was shaken. He was because he's a religious man in that. So he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I said, "Mian Sahib, जब उन्होंने आपको बद दुआ देनी शुरू कर दी थी तो मुझे पता था कि आप छुट्टी हो जाएगी आपकी." So he said, "नहीं, I'm sorry." And मैंने भी बहुत बड़ा कुछ मेरे ऊपर भी बड़ा कुछ गुजरा है. मुशर्रफ ने मेरे साथ ये किया, ये किया, ये किया. And then खुद ही कहने लगे. Punjabi में he said something which basically in English means what goes round comes round. Meaning that I did this to you and look what happened to me. So we said, let's forgive and forget. And so that was the end of that particular episode. And we've had our ups and downs, and it goes on. There's never a dull moment. Musharraf is very interesting.
Yes, please carry on about...
I interviewed Musharraf 15 days after he did his coup. He's forgotten about it, naturally, for BBC, in which he said to me that Kargil was the right thing to do, and that he will continue to wage war with India as long as Kashmir is not with Pakistan. And it's all on tape. For about a year, I thought he would do good things. I thought he would be really genuinely enlightened and moderate and open the way up for a different sort of Pakistan. Many people believe that. There is a tendency to get frustrated with the democratic process and the sort of leaders we throw up, and then to hanker for military rule. And when somebody like Musharraf comes along, you think the guy is straight, he's candid, he hasn't done any corruption, his family lives very modestly, he's a candid man, he's open. and he's talking, saying the right things in terms of liberalism and all the rest of it, and moderation and modernism, and so, okay. But a year down the line, I had begun to get disillusioned, and I started writing against some of his policies. So one day he invited me to the army house for breakfast, tea actually. It was 11 a.m. in the morning. Jugnu and I went there. And we thought this would be a nice, pleasant conversation, but actually it turned out to be pretty rough. He came in with his MS, which was Brigadier Rashid, and they came in and he was carrying copies of the Friday Times. And the editorials had been marked in red and blue. And it was deja vu for me again. When I had problems with Benazir, they would show me copies of the Friday Times with markings. This is what you've written. And I sat there thinking, I've been through this before. And Nawaz Sharif had done the same thing to me. Ye aapne likha hai. And now Musharraf was coming in with copies of the Friday Times. So, I got tense. So immediately after, hello, how are you? All well, yes. Well, Najam, what have you been writing? So it started off on a very bad. So I just said this to him. I said, General Sahab, I've been through this before. I've been through this with Benazir. I've been through this with Nawaz Sharif, and I really don't want to go through this. Is this why you invited me for tea? अब जुगनू मेरे साथ बैठी हुई थी, उसने मुझे मेरा हाथ पकड़ा कि वो take it easy. But frankly, I lost it. I lost it, and I said all this. And he sort of was a bit taken aback and said, no, but let me explain this, and this is not right, and this is not right. So I said, General Sahab, I'm not ready to discuss this. Silence. And he looked at Rashid Qureshi. Rashid Qureshi was, kya pata nahi kya hoga. And Jugnu could see कि ये काफी tension हो गई है यहाँ, and the president of Pakistan, and you're sitting in army house, and ये tension चल रही है यहाँ, and to which and I am sitting there almost about to burst, blood pressure चढ़ा हुआ है मेरा कि यार what is this? Had it 3 दफा मैं जेल काटा हूँ, अभी भी आप मुझे बकवास करते हैं इस किस्म की मेरे साथ बात करते हैं. I lost it. Jugnu turns to the general and says, General Sahab, I hope he will not go to prison again. So he looked at Jugnu and looked at me and he said, no, he won't go to prison again. आप इनको समझाएं. She said, General Sahab, मैं क्या समझाऊं? I agree with him. To cut a long story short, that half-an-hour interview turned into a 3-hour session. We kept talking about this, that, and the other. I tried to explain my point of view. He tried to explain his point of view. He invited me to lunch. We went on and had lunch with his family, his wife, and I think daughter it was. And we had a great time and became friends. And then had another rough moment with Musharraf, which is again very interesting. After 9/11, Musharraf called a meeting of all the top media people to explain his policy vis-a-vis America and 9/11. So he sat there and he explained why he took the decision to side with America and give them overflying rights and so on and so forth. And in his arguments he said that, we tried to persuade the Taliban. I sent my DG ISI to Mullah Omar and we tried to persuade him to give up Osama bin Laden, but they wouldn't agree. And we warned them that if you don't do this, the Americans are likely to bomb you and so on and so forth, and we won't be able to protect you. But Mullah Omar didn't listen, and so on and so forth. And so we've now decided that, there's no way out. This is the best deal Pakistan can get. We can't stop them. If we stop them, they'll go to India, and from India they'll fly to Afghanistan via some other corridor. And there's nothing we can do. We might as well, lie back and enjoy it and try and get some money out of them and so on and so forth. And I remember when and he said, well, there'll be this Taliban and there's this and there's this, and he gave a long line about it. And then people started asking questions. So at some stage I raised my hand and said, Najam, yes. So I said, जी General साहब मुझे तो एक चीज़ का डर है कि there will be a backlash. There will be refugees in Pakistan. The Taliban might come over and carry on operations against the Americans from here. And then he said, no problem, we'll deal with them. I said, but what will you do about the jihadis and all the others that you've been training in Afghanistan for Kashmir? And the sectarian organizations which have their camps there. If you act against the Taliban, you will also have to act against them. And if you don't act against them, then this entire enterprise is going to go by the... So he said, why? You are always asking, got upset. He said, you're always asking stupid questions. I'm telling you it won't happen, this will happen, that will happen. And you're always asking negative questions. I don't know again, I don't know what got into me. I got up again. And I said, but General Saab, I'm telling you, you'll have to take your kid gloves off as far as these sectarian elements are concerned and jihadis are concerned. And he blew up. I don't know whether he understood that phrase, kid gloves, but he actually thought that I was insulting him. He stood up and said, you're calling me a coward? I said, no, sir, I'm not calling you. He said, you're calling me a coward. I said, I'm not calling you a coward, sir. I now got really scared because, when he got up, everybody else got up with him, all the other generals and everybody. And, all my colleagues were looking at me, Sethi's lost it again. And you won't believe it. He walked out. End of conference, he just stormed out of the conference. And everybody followed him. And I'm standing there not knowing कि अब मेरे साथ अब क्या होगा. And all my colleagues, not one of them came to me to say, it's okay, yaar, don't worry, well done, you asked the right question. Not one of them. They all trooped past behind him. And I was standing there all alone when everybody had left, not knowing कि अब मैं बाहर जाऊंगा तो मेरे साथ पकड़ लेंगे, क्या करेंगे, क्या होगा. And then General G.A. Ghulam Ahmed, who was his chief of staff, came to me, took me to a corner and said, I don't think he understood your question. उन्हें kid gloves का नहीं समझ आया. He thought you were calling him a coward, that you will not fight them. And I said, but that's not what I was saying. I'm saying the policy has to take into account. He said, yes. मैं उनको समझा लूँगा. But don't worry, nothing is going to happen to you. So have a cup of tea and then you can go. I came back and I wrote an editorial supporting his policy, but warning about the danger posts ahead, saying ये होगा, इसके लिए तैयारी करें, नहीं करेंगे तो ये होगा. And I got a call from General G.A. saying कि we have read your editorial and the President would like to speak to you. So Musharraf came on the line and said, wonderful editorial. I'm sorry about what happened that day and we must meet soon. I said, yes, yes, sir. Humility, he had that humility. He could say sorry. And he's always been like that. He's impetuous. He says things. When you point out to him that he's not right, he'll say yes. I remember he said to me, I'm doing this referendum. I said, don't do it. He said, why not? I said, because the referendum is a fail. It's just a failure, admission of failure. Look at the history of referendum. This is not Switzerland that you have a referendum here. Look at what Ziaul Haq did. You're going to do the same thing, 99% turnout. What are you doing? No. Of course, turned out to be a disaster. Much later, he said, I reminded him of it. He said, no, you were right. I was wrong. So, the thing about Musharraf is that he's a very candid person. He's a very open person. He's a very likable person. But of course, at the end of the day, he's an army general, and army generals at the end of the day are army generals. And they will do what they will do, and they will not do what they will not do. But I think amongst the lot, amongst the pack, he was one of the best.
That's really something. I still had a lot of questions about generals and politicians and your view of history, of which you happen to be a partisan. I said you continue to occupy central stage, but I'm getting warnings from that corner saying that it is time to wind up. We must, of course, continue this and in the year's time. Do we have time for questions? They disallowed that as well. Nahin?
Let's have 5 minutes.
Yes. 5 minutes. Will you allow us 5? Gee, because... Yes,
Altaf
I still
bhai.
have Altaf Bhai, Maulana Fazlur
okay.
Rahman,
Yeah,
Qazi
I could
Hussain,
tell you political
President
stories.
Ghani, and but
Hello.
Let me just talk a little bit about Altaf Hussain.
just
I am in
few
his
minutes.
city, as it were,
Acha.
and
I think
I should be
probably
very
have
careful.
just only this one question. We'll have to work out some other format here. Acha.
So,
but
shall I-
quickly,
Quickly.
one question.
Well,
Acha.
I've had
Last question. Okay.
all right. Well, I've had a couple of close encounters of the third kind with Altaf
With
Bhai.
Bhai.
And every time I meet him, I say to him, make sure that I don't go back in a bori. And he assures me that that will not happen. And that, and every time I come to Karachi, I get an assurance from him. And I carry on doing what I do, and he keeps getting upset with me. He keeps calling me up. And, every call is not less than 1 hour. But I have now a safeguard mechanism. And that safeguard mechanism is कि जुगनू को उन्होंने अपनी बहन बना लिया. तो मैं वो कहता हूँ कि वो बहन का जरा ख्याल कीजिएगा. जब आप मेरे से नाराज हो जाते हैं बहन का ख्याल कीजिए. हाँ बिल्कुल
I think on this note we'll have to call it a day, but I think it will be a continuation. Right? We'll have to continue this in some other forum, in some other form, because there really is a lot to learn from Najam here. And on behalf of Oxford University Press, the organizers, and everyone who's been involved in this literary event, I would like to express my deepest gratitude and thanks to you, Najam, for sharing these thoughts with us. And of course, we look forward to the day when we shall all have it in cold print,
Yes.
in a magnum opus, if I might say so, which will really be the history of Pakistan, and nothing short of that, a definitive one at that. So on that note, Najam, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.